What is going on YouTube? This is ShadeMiss99 and I am bringing you a chess analysis video. I am really excited to be making this video for you. I have not recorded a video in a long time. I played this game here. This is Commander Krauser versus Ricky Merritt 1. We're both rated high 1200 elo, and this is just a really interesting game for analysis. I wanted to make a video over it because it really demonstrates the mindset of what a low elo player is like, and I think I can really make a good point here to show how improvements can be made with these games and to hopefully make my own elo go up one day. I'm hoping to at least get out of 1200 sometime soon. So anyway, I decided to open with e4. I don't really have any particular opening in mind. I'm just going off of what my opponent does here. I don't have as much opening knowledge as I should, but I know that this is the Caro-Kann defense. And I know that usually the next move is this, so I decided to go ahead and take the center, logical, and my opponent goes for it. So at this point I know that there is the exchange variation, which would look something like this, and there's also the advanced variation, which is what I go for. I don't know anything about Caro-Kann theory outside of this. I just try to play some pretty decent chess with developing pieces, don't hang anything like low elo players tend to do. I chose the advanced variation because I'm just under the assumption my opponent is probably not an expert on this defense either. So I just wanted to take up as much space as I could. So my opponent, bishop here, and I decided to develop a knight pawn here. It kind of creates this reverse London system. It's almost like a London system, but it's backwards, and it's for black. And I decided to go bishop here, trying to trade off this powerful bishop. This is a similar theory or a theme you would see in the London system, where black would try to trade off the dark squared bishops in similar fashion, and black plays the move that white is supposed to play in this kind of scenario, which is just bishop back. So bishop takes now has this annoying move, pawn takes, opening up this rook. I'm about to castle here. I don't want this rook already eyeballing my pawn, because now he has ideas of like somehow getting a queen over here and checkmating me, and that's not cool. And so I ignore this bishop. I decided to just castle. Very logical. At this point, analysis bar doesn't say that either of us have made any terrible moves yet, and my opponent decides to just develop, and I play a move here. Pawn to h4. Now let me explain to you why I played this move. This might seem like a strange move, but I played this move because my 1255 elo looking ass lives in limbo, right? And for some reason I still thought I had a rook here, and I was like, oh my god, pawn h4, pawn h5 attacks this really strong bishop and forces this trade, and I would love that. So I was like, yes, of course. And so my opponent being the lunatic they are, gets completely terrified by the power of this move, plays pawn to h6, which completely defeats the point of why he put his bishop here in the first place. The best move in this position is to just take, because after takes, these pawns are abysmal. This rook is abysmal. This knight is kind of sad. He has to go here, and this is just a position I would enjoy. However, as I said, I live in limbo. I still thought there was a rook here, so I just give my opponent a free pawn. My opponent can take this pawn. It is free, but remind you, my opponent also exists in limbo. He also thought there was a rook here, and just doesn't take the free pawn. And at this point, I'm like, oh, thank you very much. He takes. And now there's just this really, really awkward rook sitting here on h7. So this rook is really awkwardly placed on h7, and you're going to see later on in this game, I really take advantage of just this weird rook placement. So the game continues. I developed this knight. So the reason I developed knight here instead of knight here, by the way, computer wants me to push pawn here to attack this strong center. I don't know. It's not my playstyle to do these kinds of moves. I like to play more positionally with my minor pieces. I do need to get better with just playing around with pawns. At this point, my opponent can only castle queenside. His rook is no longer, his rook moved, so he cannot castle kingside anymore. So it would make sense that the computer would like the idea of just launching the pawns now, because it makes castling queenside all the more unsatisfactory. But the reason I put knight here instead of knight here is because I like the idea of knight here, and then hopefully maybe getting knight here, or even knight here attacking this weak pawn. Whereas with knight here, I kind of saw that I was, like, I was kind of just, if I could draw arrows. I was kind of, like, I guess I could still go here, but, I liked the idea of the knight being, here instead. So my opponent decides to push here. Computer doesn't say it's a bad move, but it does give me a point on the little analysis bar here. Now this is where the position gets kind of weird. I could take, but I do knight here. The computer still wants me to push this pawn. This looks complicated. I'm not smart enough to figure these positions out. I push knight here, so knight pawn push here seems logical, but at that point I would just go here and attack this pawn, and this knight's happy, and I'm happy. He doesn't do this, though. He does not push pawn, he doesn't take anything, he decides to develop his queen. It's fairly logical. Of course, opponent wants to develop their pieces, and my opponent also wants to castle. There's a couple of ideas here. At this point, I could play the move pawn takes, and then my opponent should respond with bishop takes, and then knight takes, queen takes, and white should just be enjoying this position a lot more. This is still really ugly back here. I can just develop my pieces, push these pawns. White enjoys this position. And I did, well, yeah. Instead of taking, I play this abysmal move, bishop e3, and thinking back, I'm not sure why I did this. I think the idea was that if I put bishop here, I would have one more attacker on this pawn, because I had ideas of just winning the pawn and not having a big trade. But this move comes with a weakness, and there's one piece on this chessboard that becomes incredibly weak now that this bishop is moved, and it is this pawn right here. So I would be wise to keep that in mind, right? So my opponent decides to long castle here, which wasn't the best move because there's still a lot of tension right here, and my opponent just chose largely to ignore it. And at this point, probably just taking is fine. However, I played the well, I did take. Never mind. I did take. Okay. Ah, yes, now I remember. So I had the biggest brain play ever. I thought less than a move ahead, and I was like, if I put my knight here, and my opponent misses the tactic, he'd like say he develops the bishop or something, I have pawn to b4 attacking the pinned knight and winning it. With the extremely short-sighted play that this pawn is now free. But my opponent must have mouse slipped because he only made it halfway. Oh my god, it's like watching two cavemen bounce their heads off of rocks. It's just this is terrible. My opponent does not take the free pawn. I'm sitting here confused, like, okay, let's get my shit together. And this is whenever I had a plan. You see, in this position, my 1200 elo ass thought of a move so brilliant, so fantastic, that there was no way it wouldn't work, and that move was queen to b1. Now, disregard that the computer calls this move an inaccuracy, because this move actually comes with a lot of hidden threats. The threat is that if my opponent misses the tactic, which he does, I actually have a completely winning move here, pawn to c3, which was played in the game, attacking the queen and opening up this diagonal to this undefended light squared bishop. And there's no way my opponent can defend against this. My opponent makes a decent move here, moves his queen over to my king side, trying to find some counterplay, but I'm taking this piece. Now, this horse is now hanging. There's nothing protecting it. There is one move in this position that black can make to save this horse. There's one move that he can make. Well, not to save this horse, but to save material. There's one move that black can make here. I'll give you a few seconds to try to find it. Alright, did you find it? So the correct move is bishop here, opening up the defense of the rook to the horse. The move that you were probably looking at was horse here, because there's nothing attacking it and it develops, which was played in the game, But this is a terrible mistake because the only thing that was protecting this horse, this knight, was bishop here. I hope that you guys don't get angry that I call them horses instead of knights. This is just something that I tend to do. So I take the free knight. My opponent is like crap and puts his knight here. And at this point, I am up 12 points of material on the analysis bar. I'm up like 2 minor pieces, and I'm more than happy to trade a few pieces now. In this position, I completely throw the game away. Now you might be wondering, how is this a 0 on the analysis bar? How is this a dead draw? Because I'm up like 2 points of material. What's going on here? And the reason why this knight blunder, which the idea of this move was knight here to attack this knight, hopefully to trade more pieces. I was trade thirsty. But my opponent has the brilliant move knight h4. Now, the reason this move is brilliant is because this move actually forces a draw. Now, note, this move forces a draw. So, the reason why this forces a draw is because this queen and this horse are attacking this pawn, threatening checkmate. There is only one move in this position that I can play that saves me, which is pawn to g3, which was played in the game. Now, black has a move that they can make here that will instantly result in the game being drawn. I'll give you a few seconds to try to find black's saving grace. Alright, so if you found queen h3, then congratulations, you just saved this game. I guess saved the loss. This move is actually forced draw. So this move threatens checkmate, queen here, and obviously you probably saw this knight is hanging. Yeah, that knight's hanging. And I can take it. However, now all my opponent has to do, queen here, king here, queen here. Yeah, and there's no way out of that. There's no way out of that for white. Knight here. Brilliancy. I played g3, only move in the position, and my opponent did not see this idea. He instead plays the abysmal move. Pawn f5. This is a terrible move. The reason why this move is terrible is because it leaves this pawn undefended, which means my knight can now come in and take this. This was not played in the game, but the reason why this move is so good is because now, if my opponent tries to go for this idea of perpetually checking me, I now have the move knight to f4, attacking the queen and defending the checkmate square, and black would just be dead lost in this position. However, I did not play this move. I played an exceptional move, knight to f3. This move also is perfectly fine. It's not as strong as this move is. It's essentially forcing the trade of this knight here. So this move was played in the game. Now queen here doesn't really work because just knight takes. Queen is just sitting here stupid now. Queen has no checks. Queen can't take anything, and she's just trapped here. This is a dead winning for white. The only move in the position, which is the move my opponent played, was just knight takes, knight takes. This knight is hanging. The opponent can take this piece, it is free. But he decides not to do that. He decides to push pawn f4. So pawn f4 is actually kind of tricky. The reason why this move is kind of tricky is, say I play like a move like queen e1, it's not losing, but there's actually pawn takes. This is a funny move, because if I'm not thinking too carefully here, and I might see like, oh, my knight is hanging, but if I take this pawn back like this, then my rook will defend the horse. This is a terrible blunder because it runs into the same issue as before, where I just get perpetualed. Yeah. So pawn here, tricky move. So there is a move in this position that white can play that just completely holds down everything. It is a move that wins on the spot. And no more tricks for black. I'll give you a couple of seconds to try and figure out this move. So if you were able to figure it out, if you found the move g2, then congratulations, you played the best move in this position. This move holds everything. Now, pawn here is met with this. There is no longer any queen takes with this repetition, and the rook now protects my pawn. This was played in the game, and my queen and the opponent now can't take this. There's basically no tricks anymore. It's game over. My opponent decides to go to queen e4, and I'm like, okay, I take, trade, and after knight to d4, my opponent resigns the game. Rest in peace, Ricky Merritt 1. You played a really good, insightful game. So the reason my opponent resigned was because I'm up 13 points, I'm up like 2 pieces, and I'm threatening to take here. I'm also threatening to trade rooks. It's just not a very pleasant position for black. And like the rook here, and then I have rook here attacking this, and it's not a good position. So black throws in a towel. Really insightful game. Really big highlight. This knight to h4 brilliancy, forcing the draw. It's just a really nice move, and I really wanted to showcase this game because of this idea of just knight here and forcing this draw, along with a lot of the other little ideas about, especially with the tunnel vision and the, entering little limbo land where I think there's pieces where there's not pieces. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Shade Messiah 9. Peace out.